All right, May 2021 QAS calculator. Let's get after it. So starting right off with number 1, it says it takes 6 hours to travel m miles at this rate. Whenever you see the word rate, you're going to be able to set up a ratio. So we can go 6 hours in m miles. And at this rate, how long is it going to take to travel 5 times m miles? So basically, all we did here was we multiplied the distance by 5. So we need to multiply the time by 5. And 6 times 5 is going to give me an answer of 30. You also could have cross-multiplied. Could have did 6 times 5 is 30. And we didn't know what this was, so you could just call that equals x. This is 1m. And we would have got the answer that way as well. Moving on to number 2. Looks like a solve-resolve, so we have to solve a linear equation. Be careful. Don't just solve this part and put the answer. They always try to trick you with that. So there's 2 routes. This is the long way. The long way is solve this one. 2x plus 4 equals 100. So minus 4 from both sides. Divide both sides by 2. And do not pick 48. That's what they want you to do. Because the real question is, what's 6 times x plus 12? So you got to plug that in there. 6 times the 48 added to 12. Well, that's 240 and 48 is 288 plus 12 would be 300. So the correct answer is B. Now that was longer than necessary because if you notice, there is a shortcut. There often is when it's these if type of then things. So if 2x plus 4 equals 100, notice that this expression right here is just 3 of these. That would give me 6x plus 12. And if you times the left by 3, you got to times the right by 3. And you'd find out the answer a little bit quicker. So either way is fine. If you're really trying to get that high score, you need to save time when available. So use that shortcut. Number 3, looks like we have a conversion problem here. 8 furlongs. 8 furlongs is how many meters? And they give us a conversion. We know that 1 furlong is 201 meters. So I have furlongs over meters. So if 1 furlong is 201, 8 furlongs would be how many? Cross multiply. Some of you may have just seen, hey, I multiply by 8. But I get 1608. Correct answer there is D. Rates and ratios, always can solve them with proportions. We have a graph on this one. The curve represents the number of fish in a population. Okay. So let's see what we got to do here. It says, which of the following is closest to the number of fish 16 months after January 15th? Well, when I look at the bottom, X numbers are the number of months after January. So 16 months after would be right here. And when I go to the chart and I work across, it looks like somewhere between 14 and 16,000, which is going to be the correct answer of C. So this is just a reading data type question. That's the category it would fit into, reading data. Looks like we have another ratio question. What is the ratio of AB to BC? Well, AB is 20 to BC is 5. And it looks like I don't even have to simplify it. Looks like it's just 20 to 5. Now you could divide both of these by 5, and I was kind of expecting to see a 4-to-1 ratio, but they didn't even make you simplify it, so this one they were pretty nice to us. Number 6. Each of the whole numbers, so that means no fractions or decimals, each of the whole numbers from 1 to 20 is written on 20 pieces of paper. They are then put into a hat and mixed up. So here's the key part. It's probability. So we need all of the possible outcomes. Everything that could be put into that hat, all the possibilities. And then we want to know, like, what are the winners? How do you win this thing? At least that's what I always look at winning. So there's 20 different numbers in this hat. 20 random numbers plugged in there, 1 through 20. Well, I win the chance. I'm trying to pull out a multiple of 3. Multiples of 3 means you just count by 3s. So we're talking 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. I don't want to go any bigger because then I go over 20. So it looks like there are only 6 numbers in that hat that are multiples of 3. So correct answer, 6 out of 20. Sometimes you may have to reduce that, divide both of them by 2, but again, they didn't make me reduce it. Kind of nice of them. Number 7, have a table. We're talking about the depth of some ocean trenches. What is the range? So the range is simply the highest value minus the lowest value. Biggest mistake on this one is the table is not in order. You know, the highest value is right here. And the lowest value is right here. So the correct answer when you subtract those two is D. Now, if you chose C, which a lot of kids do, they assume that it was in order and this was the lowest and this was the highest, and I think that would be the answer. So be careful, that wasn't the highest value. Oftentimes they don't put the things in order, so you got to be careful when you do that. All right, now we have a scatter plot. I got to shrink this down a little bit to fit it all in the graph, maybe even a little bit more. So we have 4 choices, and pH is on the bottom, yield is on the side. So we're talking about corn. We're trying to know what's the best pH for growing corn. It says for the 5 samples, the relative yield was a maximum. So our Y value was a maximum when the soil was 6.8. And then it decreased. All right? So we're highest at 6.8, and then we drop as we go bigger. Well, on this graph, 6.8, that's not the highest yield. The highest yield was way over here at 5 point something. Can't be you. 6.8, that's not the highest yield. Right here, that is the highest yield at 6.8, and then it dropped. So I like C. 6.8, it's a pretty high yield, but then the yield got even bigger when you increase the pH, so that's not what the 5 samples did. So the correct answer here is C. It's kind of a reading data problem again. Let's go to number 9, blow this up a little bit bigger. So after a new car is purchased, the value of the car is modeled by a function that decreases exponentially. All right, so we need to know what that means. That does not mean we're decreasing linear. That would be by a constant amount, dropping by the same amount every year. Decrease exponentially means we drop really fast and then we start slowing off. All right, so we're looking for something like that. So we need to decrease over time. So part A says every year the value of the car is $800 more than the previous year. That's wrong because we want to decrease over time. Each year the value of the car is $800 less. That is decreasing, but it's decreasing by the same amount every single year. That's not what exponential does. That's linear, so it can't be B. 8% more, no, that's increasing. Each year the value of the car is 8% less. That is what we're looking for, because if you keep dropping by 8%, you're going to actually overall drop less and less every year. Even though it's the same percentage, you're taking a percentage of a smaller number over time, so you're going to keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So the correct answer there is D. They often like those questions where you compare constant growth to exponential growth or decay, either direction. All right. Number 10, looks like we have a box and whisker plot. So this is a statistics question. Let's see what we got here. The daily high temperatures for a city in the month of February are above. Surely not here in Michigan, we're not seeing 70s. Which of the following is closest to the median? So how you read these box and whisker plots? This is the low value. This is the high value. If they wanted the range, we could subtract those two numbers. This right here represents the 25th percentile. This right here is the 50th percentile, aka the median. And then this right here would be the 75th percentile. So what these graphs do is they break things into quarters. You know, they break all the numbers into 4 sections, each weighing 25%. But this question just said, hey, what's the median? So it's going to occur right in here, which would be at about 42. So you just got to have to know how to read a box and whisker plot. Number 11, the solution to the given system is AB. What is the value of 3 times A plus 3 times B? So there's 2 ways to do this problem, all right? I'm going to take you through the traditional route, and then, of course, I got a shortcut for you. So the traditional route is I want to eliminate, I want to get either my coefficients for my A's or B's to be opposites, meaning that I want a -2 and a +2, so I can eliminate a letter. So maybe I'm going to multiply this bottom row by -2. So on the top, I'll leave it alone. And on the bottom, I multiply everybody by -2. And once I get my opposites, you know, I have opposite coefficients for my A's, I'm going to combine the rows and they're going to disappear. I eliminate. So now I have -3b equals -21. Divide, and I find out b equals 7. All right, well, I need to get A though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to substitute this 7 in to one of the 2 equations. I'll plop it in right there. And I'll get 2a plus 7 equals 17. Subtract 7 from both sides. Divide both sides by 2. So now I have my A and my B. And what I can do is I can finally answer the question. 3 times my A answer plus 3 times my B answer. Well, that's 15 plus 21. Gives me a grand total of 36. Now, that took a couple minutes. There's a faster way, and if you do enough of these tests, you'll realize oftentimes when they just don't want A or B, but they want some weird expression, you always want to try to add or subtract the 2 rows together and see if you get lucky. Well, watch what happens. If I add these 2 rows together, I get 3 A's plus 3 B's, which is what I'm looking for, equals 36. I can speed up the question considerably. So knowing that shortcut buys you about 2 more minutes to battle with a harder question later on. All right, number 12, looks like we got a little trigonometry going on here. So it says in triangle ABC, so I'm going to draw that. You know, right now I don't really know where the angles are, so I'm just going to kind of sketch this thing out. And it says the measure of angle C is 90, so that locks in C. A and B really doesn't matter. I'm just going to put A at the top, B at the bottom. And then they give me a piece of a clue. They say, hey, the sine of A is 3/5. All right, so one thing you might remember from geometry is a mnemonic device called SOHCAHTOA. And basically the S represents sine, and then the ratio is the opposite leg over the hypotenuse. Might as well knock these other ones out. Cosine is the adjacent leg. It's a weird looking D. Sorry about that. And over hypotenuse. And finally, the tangent is the opposite leg over the adjacent leg. So when it's all based on your frame of reference point, so when they say the sine of A, that's my reference angle. That's where my dude or my girl's standing. And the triangle is from that person's viewpoint. So if 3 is on top, that means the opposite leg is 3. So that would mean across this triangle, boom, boom, boom. There's 3. And the hypotenuse, which is always across from the 90-degree angle, that's the 5. So I have that ratio. Now, if I really needed to get AC, I could do Pythagorean theorem, or I could realize that 3, 4, 5 is a Pythagorean triple, but you don't really need that on this problem because they want to know what is the ratio for the cosine of B. So the cosine of B means my reference point changes. My person is now standing down here at B, and cosine, remember, is adjacent on top of hypotenuse. So according to the person standing on B, this would now be the adjacent, and this is the hypotenuse. So you'll notice it's still 3/5. This is a very common SAT type question. the big idea they want you to understand is that the sine of one acute angle is always going to be equal to the cosine of the other angle. All right? And same thing, the sine of B would be equal to the cosine of A. It's called the complement theorem. So if you know that, you'll be in pretty good shape. All right, moving on down. Number 13, we have a linear function, so we have a line. Most people are pretty familiar with the y equals mx plus b, even though they're not always really good at linear equations. They usually know that that's the slope and that's the y-intercept. So I have a linear line, and it goes through a couple points. So they give me a couple x, y's that I can choose from. And if I look at my answers, all of these people have a y-intercept of 2. So the y-intercept doesn't really help me out. And actually, they told me right here the y-intercept is 2. But I want to find the slope. So the slope, remember, is the change in y over the change in x. Some teachers write it this way. If you Google it, you might see this equation. But basically, I'm going to subtract the y's. So I'm going to go 6 take away 2. And I got to go the same direction when I subtract 2 take away 0. And I get 4 over 2. So it has a slope of 2, which is right here. So the correct answer is C. If you're not really good with the formula and you'd rather draw this thing out, it takes a little bit longer maybe, but you could draw it out. You could put a point at 0, 2, right there. You could put a point at 2, 6, 4, 5, 6, and put a dot there. Snap your line. And then if you wanted to, you could figure out the slope. And you could be like, well, I'm going up 4 over 2. So my rise over my run is also 2. So you could do it with a picture and not with algebra. Algebra might be faster though. All right, sneaking on down to number 14. So we need to construct a model for this story problem, and it's inequalities. They all look the same. It's all D plus R. It's all 15. We just got to realize what inequality we're looking for. So that's the big piece here. So it says Wyoming State Senate had 30 members consisting of Democrats and Republicans. So we know that when we add these two together, D plus R, it has to equal 30. And it says, let D, so I guess I shouldn't do that. Let D represent the yes votes for the Democrats. R is the yes votes for the Republicans. And so here's kind of the key part. For a bill to pass, more than half of 30. So all of the yes Democrats plus all of the yes Republicans, half of 30 is 15. And we need to be more than half. So the correct answer is A. C looks pretty good, but that equal really screws it up because now it doesn't pass. Now it's tied 15-15. So C doesn't work. The other two are less than, so they were no good anyway. All right, number 15. What do we got going here for this one? So given the equation, so we have a quadratic. C is a number. If the equation has exactly one solution, what is the value of C? Well, the only way you can have one solution if you're a quadratic is it means you come down and you somehow you only have one real zero, all right? So you just kiss or you're just tangent to that x-axis, which means there's going to be a double root, which kind of tells me that I'm going to get the same factor twice. And so the only way that that can happen is if this thing ends up being a perfect square. And if you've done complete the square before, if I complete the square here, I take this b term in the middle and I cut it in half, and then I square it, -1 times itself, and I do that. So if that's the case, I'll have a perfect square. I'll basically have x minus 1 times itself. And that tells me that I have the two zeros are the exact same. They both occur at 1. So I know this graph actually is going to come down and do something like that. Kind of a tough question. But you need to complete the square and you need to understand that there's a double root and it ends up factoring into a perfect square. Kind of more of a late Algebra 1 or Algebra 2 type question. All right, number 16. So we have a table. It says the table gives some values for lengths, which are x, which means these are y's, or they're referring to as f of x. Those are interchangeable, y and f of x. Call it either one you want. Which of the following is that relationship? So these all look linear. I see some slopes here. So I got to figure out what the slope is. So one way to do this, to me the fastest way to do this is use the table to find the slope. So the slope is how much is the y changing compared to how much is the x changing. So if I do this, it looks like the change in y is 810 minus 405. So the change in y is 405. And then the x is changing by 10 take away 5. Or the change in x is just 5. So it looks like my slope is 81. So I know the correct answer here is A. Another way you could do it is you could just test points. For instance, I might want to just stick x in and see where y equals 810. And if you notice, if you stick 10 in here, in this equation, 81 times 10 would give you what you need. If you did this times 10, you're going to be like way too big. You'd be like 4,000. This one's going to be way too big. This one, 5 times 10 would be 50, and that's going to be too small. It's not big enough. So you could test points, or you could find slope. I kind of like to find the slope. It's a little quicker for me. All right, number 17. 17 is a scatter plot. Set of data represented by a scatter plot. Which of the following linear equations? So there's a lot of these on the SAT. They really hammer y equals mx plus b. So one of these are going to model a best fit line. If I peek at the answers, which I always do before I get started, I notice that this is kind of written in y equals b plus mx form. They give me the y-intercept first. And I see some different y-intercepts there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of draw my own best fit line, just roughly. And I think something like that looks kind of good, kind of goes through the majority of the dots. And just by doing that, I can kind of see that my y-intercept should be somewhere up around 24, 25, 26. I think 18.2 is way too low for the y-intercept. So I'm going to get rid of these two. So now I have it down to a 50-50. I can't really see a difference between these two numbers, but now I can look at the slope. Slope of -6 or slope of something less than 1. Well, a slope of -6 needs to go down 6 over 1. If I pick a dot on here and I go down 6 over 1, down 6 would be down to here and over 1. And if I go down another 6 over 1, that line is way too steep in the negative direction. Can't be C. The only one that makes sense here is A. So that's kind of how I did it. Another way would be to pick a couple points. If you pick 2 points that you think, maybe these two look like a decent best fit line, I could have just found that slope. It looks like we're dropping, 8? Drop 8. And we run from 8 to 26, that's 18. So a slope of -8 over 18, well, that's going to be a negative number smaller than 1. And if I look through here, there's only one slope that's a negative number that's less than 1. So again, I got it down to A. So you got to be able to analyze slope and intercept. All right, number 18 and 19, looks like this one goes with both of these. So this one says, in 2016, the total cost for 200 books that were sold was between, so the cost of 200 books is in here. Well, if I look at my cost, hardcovers are $14, paperbacks are $10. So there's 200 books. I don't really know how it's split up. Is it 100, 100, 50, 150? So it says, which of the following could be the number of hardcover books? All right. Well, I would just test these. So if there's 80 hardcover books, that means there's going to be 120 paperbacks. Because remember, we had to add up to 200. So that's the combination to try. So if I do 80 hardcover books, well, the cost of each hardcover is $14. And if I have 120 paperbacks, the cost was $10. So when I put that together, I would get 800 and 320. That's 1120 plus 1200. So that gives me 2320, which does fit right into my range. So I'm liking A, but I get a little nervous when that first one works. So I might just test another one. What if we did 120 hard? So what if we did 120 hard covers, which to make 200 we would need 80 paperbacks. Well, that's going to be 800. Let me get a calculator here. 120. I should not be lazy and just do this. That's 1200 and 480. That's 1680. Sometimes I get lazy. Shouldn't do that. Well, that's too much. That's 2480. That's not within my range. So this doesn't work. As you put more hardcovers, they keep getting more expensive. So the correct answer here is just A. All right, number 19. Same chart up above. And this one says, an analyst estimates the cost of the paperback books is going to increase by 50 cents every year. So we need to find something that models the cost. So the cost is going to be, well, right now it's $10. All right, we're talking paperbacks. So we're $10, plus we're going to go up 50 cents per year. So putting that into an equation, I'm at 10, and I'm going to increase by 50 cents times, they're calling T's as years. So the correct answer here is going to be C. It's called constructing a linear model. That's what they're testing there. All right, we've had another problem similar to this. This is a parallel problem. We've already saw a perpendicular, I believe, on the no calculator. So line M, we have an equation for. So this is M. If I want to be parallel, all right, if I want to be parallel, I need to have the same slope. I got to be the same exact slope if I'm going to be parallel. So I know my equation is going to be y equals negative 3/4 x. All right, but I don't know the intercept. I don't know the y-intercept. But I do have a clue. They do tell me, they say, hey, this point, this xy, makes my equation true. All right, it lives on line P. So let's plug these values in and solve for B. So negative 3 equals negative 3/4 times 4 plus B. And this is negative 3. Well, this is 4 over 1. So that's a negative 12 divided by 4. That's a negative 3 plus B. Add 3 to both sides. It looks like B equals 0. So it looks like if B equals 0, my answer is just y equals negative 3/4 x. So correct answer here is going to be B. There is another way to do it. I don't really recommend it because it takes longer. But if you wanted to, you could skip all the algebra. You have to draw a pretty decent graph. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you got to be somewhat straight and somewhat accurate. But you could say, hey, M is, it crosses at positive 2. And then a slope of negative 3/4 means go down 3 over 4. So go down 3 over 4. All right, which means go up 3 the other direction 4. So I could say, hey, this is line M. Well, then we know line P is parallel to that one, but we have a starter point. We have 4, negative 3. So go over 4, down 3, right here. And now if I run the same slope, 3 over 4, so I go up 3 over 4, up 3 over 4, it's going to run parallel. and then I can see what the y-intercept is. It's 0. So you could have did it with a picture. I guess whatever way's easier for you. I'm kind of more of an algebra person on those, but don't have to be. All right, number 21. So on this one, let me scroll down. Looks like I don't have, I'm missing part D. All right, so we have a picture of a triangle, and it says, which of the following additional measurements would to the triangle provides enough information to get the length of AB? So I want to try to get AB, and I want to know, could these clues here do it for me? Well, if I knew the length of AC, if someone said, hey, the length of AC is 20, I'm like, oh, I could do that. I could do the Pythagorean theorem. So if you give me a second side, and I know the 25 already, I could do Pythagorean to get the third side. So I know that 1 is part of the answer. So it can't be B and it can't be D. That's huge. I got it down to a 50-50. Even if I screw up, my odds are pretty good at getting this one right. Now, what if they give me, so instead of giving me AC, what if they told me the measure of ABC? For instance, let's say they said, hey, this is 40 degrees. Could I solve this? Yes, I could solve this because I could use trigonometry. I could say, hey, the cosine, when standing on 40 degrees, is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And I can solve that. I have 2 out of 3 pieces. So this also would work. So the correct answer here is C, either 1 or 2, not just 1 only. So that was kind of more of a trig question.